Well, we are live here on LinkedIn. It's Thursday. It's 1 o'clock Central Time. Excited to be here again with my friend and colleague, Greg Githens, author of How to Think Strategically. Today, we are following up on some conversations that we started recently regarding thinking strategically and the micro skills that he pulls out in his book, which we're actually doing a mastermind group on. I want to get that in front of you just real quickly. That is starting October 1st. As a lead up to that, every week we're going to be doing another section on talking about these micro skills and how we can apply these micro skills in our work, in our business, our relationships, and that we can become better people, I think, all around by taking some of these skills and moving into them. But we don't want to spend a whole lot of time selling you on stuff that you may not care about. Instead, we want to spend about 20, 30 minutes or so talking about these micro skills of how to think, of strategic thinking, so that you can take away some nuggets today that can lead you into better personal relationships, better business relationships, and I think critically lead into a life that you want to have in the future. So, Greg, before I ramble on and get and kick us off here, anything you want to say to our audience?
Nothing more than welcome and appreciate you being here. And Jason said we've been getting some feedback, so I appreciate that as well.
Yeah, along the lines of that feedback, the last time we talked, we had a great discussion, and I admittedly am a philosophical guy. I know that you are too. You wrote a book, right? And I think to write a book, you have to have some level of philosophy, just rambling around upstairs. The feedback I got last time was really interesting, and I found myself agreeing with it. It went something like this. Hey, that discussion you guys had was very philosophical, but not very actionable. I wanted a takeaway. Kind of the sense I got was like, hey, what's that 3-step process to strategic thinking that I can take away today? And I feel like I was thinking that too. And I posed that to you, and Greg, you kind of kicked the ball right back to me. And I thought, wow, you're totally right. So what did you tell me?
Yeah. Well, there's a trade-off between actionability and reflection is kind of what it boils down to. So I often say this is that thought without action is procrastination, but action without thought is impulsiveness. And my general observation, what I usually see people doing is acting very impulsively and acting very intuitively. And they just get into a habitual rut of being really, really busy. And one of the things that I want to get across to people to be good strategic thinkers is this: take a pause, step back, practice the micro skill of reflection, and just sort of get a sense of where you're at. So one of the biggest obstacles to strategic thinking is people using the excuse, I'm too busy to think strategically. And I think a big part of the answer is to catch yourself if the little voice inside of your head is saying, I'm too busy to think strategically, to say, well, maybe you aren't, because the people that are having great successes are taking the time. And one quick story, and maybe this will serve as a takeaway kind of tool for you as well. So I stand in front of audiences a lot and have them, get together in small groups and do some brainstorming on flip charts and doing those kind of things. And then I always build this into kind of the debrief. And I ask the question, what's interesting about this? Does anybody see any themes, any patterns, any anomalies? What's interesting? And I'll let people remark on whatever they see. And then I conclude by saying, here's one simple rule that helps you recognize what strategic thinking is. And it's this rule: strategic thinkers are always looking for something that's interesting. Now, here's the trade-off to our conversation about actionability, Jason, which is interesting things may not be actionable, but actionable things may not be interesting. So I have a bias towards finding these interesting things, and I think I could provide a pretty good body of proof to say that these interesting things that we observe and note is often the spark to insight, and insight is the secret sauce of strategy.
Yeah, I actually wrote a post the other day on LinkedIn about my fascination with bonsai. Now I'm 42, almost 43, and I think that 4 times, this would be the 4th time in my life, I've taken up the process of bonsai something. 3 other times I've killed whatever it was I was trying to bonsai. The process of bonsai, I think, is important to this discussion because making a good bonsai tree takes years, 5, 10, 15 years. And it's a process of a lot of curiosity about what is this tree's needs, and then reflecting on that and think, okay, how is this going to grow in the future? And then it's just a lot of waiting. It's a lot of thinking. It's a lot of just sitting there. And there's only a handful of skills that you actually need to have. You need to water it. You need to give it proper light and temperature and things like that. But it is a very slow process. It's not a lot of action. The action is very limited in terms of the life of the bonsai tree.
Yeah, and many of the Oriental type traditions put a stress on the idea of reflection and almost meditative silence, but then swift, decisive strokes. And again, many of us are kind of flailing around impulsively, overstimulated by the environment, and not really clear on what our goals are, and not really clear on how we define success. So I describe strategic thinking's orientation as success in the future. So whatever you define as success, I'll acknowledge it's a fairly ambiguous concept, but we all have different ideas of success. But the idea of casting our imagination into the future is a really important one.
I love that. Success in the future. I'm dropping that in the chat here. And if people, I'm following along with these comments that we've got coming in. If you're following us on YouTube Live, or if you're following us on LinkedIn Live, if you got ideas or questions, drop it into the chat. We're sure to get to that. We've got something like 50 people signed up for this today. So it's pretty popular. And if you have something to contribute to the discussion, be sure to do that. Don't just leave it sitting in your soul. So this idea of success in the future, I'm going to put in the chat here for everybody's value. That's a really interesting way to look at it, because like we're talking about, when we are attentive and curious about our environment, then we can set ourselves up for, I think, better decision making. We can set ourselves up for really charting a course rather than just taking action right away, simply because we have some sort of anxious energy that we need to satisfy.
Yeah, that's so true. So one of the micro skills of strategic thinking is the micro skill of reflection. Just pausing to take some time to understand your life's journey and where you've been. And I'm going to give you a couple of, since we're looking for good, useful things, couple of ideas that you can act upon. So one is a reflection activity. Divide your life into 7-year increments. Age birth to 7 to 14, and so forth. And where were you at age 7, 14, 21, 28, and so forth? And it just forces you to stop and kind of get grasp of where your life has gone. And I'm a little bit older than you, Jason, so I have several more of those increments in place than you do. But I think that you find as you get older, that's where the wisdom comes from, and especially if you practice some of these skills of reflection. So every 7 years, just make note of, where were you living, what was your family situation like, what were your struggles. Okay, and here's the second idea, and it's very, very closely related. I call it the trauma inventory. So for that same period, ask yourself, what's the worst thing that happened to you? What's the worst thing that happened to you in that period? So for me, when I was, around 7 or so, I had asthma and allergies. And earlier years, I was bullied in high school. Those were some of the things that I took note of. And another micro skill is the micro skill of personal resilience. I think I've mentioned before, I think resilience is going to be the word of the year for 2020. I've got some good news for you, is that typically as we get older, we become more resilient. We come through our process of reflecting upon ourselves and understanding the personal resilience that we have. We just sort of start to shrug things off and not let the little details bother us so much.
Yeah, the quote that comes to my mind is, this was said to me a number of years ago. You know, the quote that we all know, which is, what is it? Oh shoot, it's dropping out of my mind now. Experience is the best teacher.
Yeah,
that's a quote that we all seem to know. We internalize, and yeah, well, I've got a lot of experiences, therefore I'm learning. And somebody turned it on its head for me at the time and said, no, that's totally false. Experience is not the best teacher. People have had all sorts of experiences. We know some of these people with a lot of experience and haven't learned anything. They're the same person they were 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Evaluated experience really is the best teacher, because it's in that process of evaluation, I think what you're talking about, reflection,
yeah,
where we have the opportunity to learn from our experiences to then carry forward into tomorrow. And whatever we're going to do tomorrow is going to set us up for the following year and the following 10 years. And that's the process of moving forward. Evaluate and reflect
mm-hmm.
on where you've been, what's worked, what hasn't worked, to then help you start or chart a new course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so right. It gives us a chance to unpack some of the elements of strategy, to say, well, maybe we had the wrong goals for the situation, or maybe we were unappreciative of the amount of resources that it was going to take to do that, or maybe the methods that we chose weren't the right methods for the situation. So it gives us, again, that more situational look, and gives us a chance to say, if I succeeded, why did I succeed? And I think another important question and important idea built into all this is, what's the role of luck? I am convinced that luck plays a greater role in our successes than we frequently give it credit for. And I think that can give us another insight as part of our life's journey.
Do you then, so I know you subscribe to the concept of Ben Franklin, how you applying certain principles and learning from them in series and over time. Do you apply the idea of, I think it was Ben Franklin who said, luck favors the prepared?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have powerful imaginations, and we can use those imaginations to start to anticipate what our goals would be, what our methods would be, what steps we can do, and don't just blindly stumble ahead. So I do think that preparation is very, very valuable for us as well. But we also need to recognize, now we're getting into the micro skill of anticipation. We also have to recognize that the future often holds emergence, things that are unpredictable. Just like with your bonsai tree, difficult to predict where that growth will come out, but you are prepared to exploit that growth, that emergence in some sort of way, because you're paying attention to it. You're watching for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's in the process of bonsai, there are certain principles about growth in a tree that need to be respected. So when a bonsai tree is pruned, when somebody's taken off, and I think this has application to our lives too, when we remove something has that energy is redirected into growth in a new place. And that happens, it happens in trees. You remove the growth you don't want, which now encourages, it doesn't make it automatic. It's not a sure thing necessarily that you're going to get growth in the place that you wanted it, since you want to see growth, but it allows that energy to be refocused into the area, into other areas where you have an opportunity for growth. And I think that's the process of strategic thinking as well. And before we get too far out ahead of ourselves, for those who are listening who don't understand this, what are you talking about, strategic thinking? Maybe let's break down this idea of what are we talking about? Is this strategic thinking, developing strategic plans for organizations, or is it life coaching for ourselves? Is it strategic planning for other people and what they need out of their life? What are we talking about? What's the book about and this topic in for strategic thinking?
Okay. Yeah, let me. So my book, How to Think Strategically, has a big idea, and I think every good book needs to have a big idea. So my big idea is this: is that strategic thinking is an individual competency. It's not a process; it's an individual competency, and thus people can be evaluated in terms of whether they are competent or not. And the basic definition of competency is: do you understand the situation you're in, and can you make reasonable judgments? So this is what I call the 4 pillars of strategic thinking. One, it's an individual competency. 2, it's using your mind. 3, it's organizing resources, like chess pieces on a chessboard. And 4, I just mentioned earlier in our talk, it's an orientation towards success in the future. So there's no other book out there that looks at the how-to individual personal aspects. And that's what I'm trying to do, is give people tools and ideas and frameworks and ways of thinking about things that can allow them to say and build some confidence in themselves. I can think strategically and I can do it competently.
It seems to me, and this is just how it resonates for me, and I'm certain it resonates differently for other folks, but it resonates for me that these are ways of being, perhaps, the way we view the world, to help us get better outcomes for ourselves. And so what it seems to me you're talking about is we can change, we have the opportunity to change the way we view the world by developing some of these skills. And we talked a lot about last time this idea of curiosity.
Yes.
And how as kids, if you think about how children develop, we didn't talk about this last time, but I think it's relevant. Children develop through curiosity. You know, it's the child, the vision of the child who's talking to the adult, and the parent saying, why? And they said, well, because, why is the sky blue? Well, because, it's a color. It had to be called the color. But why? And then you're like, well, because, but why? And you're like, because I said so. And it's interesting that at some point in time, this whole because I said so, we just get tired of being curious in some ways.
Yeah.
We get tired, even as adults, of being curious, because we feel like maybe we know the answers, or it's too difficult to find the answers, or I don't have time to find the answers. And so I tend to, or we tend to as adults, back off this idea of just being curious.
Right.
And we find that in our interpersonal communications. And the framework of this discussion is all about to being a better coach, and the idea of, if you want better answers, you got to ask better questions. And there are skills to asking questions of ourselves so we can coach ourselves, and of others to help them in their development, either as a professional coach or even as a friend. So how does that resonate with you, this idea of curiosity as a child, and then how does that play out in coaching ourselves and coaching others?
Yeah. So you got to the because I said so, and as adults, we have a certain sort of leaning towards authoritative knowledge, where it doesn't matter if the knowledge being presented to us is true or not. The only thing that matters is that some authority person is giving it to us. And we salute it, and we comply, and we go along, and that's the life for many, many people in organizations. They apply, they go along, they get along, and they do those kind of things. Strategic thinkers are a little bit unorthodox, unconventional, heretical, and often in asking some of these kinds of questions, like why is the sky blue? Or why are we doing our business model this way? Why are we stating that this is our vision statement? And embedding that with a little bit of skepticism is not often a welcome conversation in organizations. But I think that's one of the important things, that if you are a part of a larger or smaller organization, is how do we have courageous conversations where we try to look at the truth? I define leadership as the ability to perceive the multifaceted reality that's around us. And that is to say, I acknowledge that other people have a different view of reality than I do. And it's the courage to help people see things in a different kind of way. I think that's the essence of what leadership is really about, meaning the personal leadership as a skill, not leadership as some position in a hierarchy.
Yeah, I agree with you. We do, as adults, tend to become a bit more authoritarian about our decision making, and certainly asserting our decisions and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And many times, I find that we're wrong.
Yeah.
And to claim that somehow we're not wrong would be to somehow deny history, because there were many times throughout history that people thought they were right, very, very right, about some very, very wrong things. Mm-hmm. And I think that the opportunity to approach those mm-hmm. from a point of skepticism and reflection, and looking for outcomes, perhaps, it can be healthy. These are topics that you bring up in your book as a framework for how to think, mm-hmm. change your thinking and change your life.
Right. So understandably, we want things simple. I mean, we got so many things going on in our heads that we search for simple answers along the way. And that's understandable, but that's also the kind of things that get us into trouble get organizations into trouble when they're talking about strategy. So here's a question that I'll often ask when some client of mine presents an organizational strategy, which is this a generic strategy that you're giving me, or is this a nuanced strategy? Mm-hmm. And I would prefer having a nuanced strategy. That is a strategy that's appropriate to the context, appropriate to the situation, and has a suitable appreciation for the detail that's out there. And it just kind of goes back to strategic thinkers look for interesting things. They're trying to craft a way towards success that is appropriate for the individual situation that they're in. And admittedly, that requires a fair amount of mental energy. And I accept that not everybody is up for it.
Yeah, you must get a bit of pushback. You go into some large organizations and big global entities talking about this.
Yeah.
What characterize the types of pushback that you get from this idea of strategic thinking, and where you believe that comes from?
Yeah, well, one common thing is just sort of benign neglect and retreating back to old habits, such as, we're really, really busy around here. We've got a big product launch and it's all hands down, or, we're getting ready to go into our busy season. So a lot of excuses tend to come up where we're blaming the busyness of our business environment for not taking the time to think strategically and for not really wanting to have a full exposure of the thing that they're calling strategy. Well, maybe I'll be found out. Another thing, I think this is particularly true of more senior people, they're saying to themselves, I have been successful because I have been successful, therefore I've had a good strategy and I must be a good strategic thinker. So they're just kind of believing their own press clippings. And they're the folks that really need the help. So I think one natural audience for my book is those people that are a little bit earlier in their career, so that they can start to be aware and develop in themselves a different way of thinking, so that as they start to get into positions where they can exercise power and have a little bit more influence, they're thinking about strategy in a useful kind of way.
Yeah, and I think the complexity of decisions increase. Yeah, I think the complexities increase when you move up in, quote unquote, the food chain or whatever. When you start becoming responsible for a lot of variables, mm-hmm. That's inherently, there's a lot of complexity to it. And I think a lot of folks want to just limit the variables, and they do it sort of in a very kind of crude way. Just hack off the variables, right? Instead of having some sort of principles to look to for how to work it through in a land of a lot of moving parts.
Yeah. So, I mean, a kind of really arbitrary but a useful benchmark is age 40 for people.
Okay.
And roughly before age 40, you're looking for the best tools and the best methods, and you're just looking for stuff that you can crank in, drop into some sort of what we call a deductive engine, and it's called winding the crank, where you must get the right answer coming out of it. People that like to use the word methodology are talking about, give me the steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. Roughly after the age 40, you find that there's multiple ways to reach success, and that all of those ways have advantages and disadvantages, and you become more seasoned in your perspective. You become more willing to take in some new and different kind of information. So one of the things that I try to encourage my younger clients is to say, don't get wrapped up in needing to have the step-by-step approach to do this. Develop your own personal common sense. Pay more attention to what's going on. Have confidence in yourself, have trust in yourself, but also I think it's useful to have a good thinking partner, someone that you can bounce your ideas off of. Because sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes these ideas are not great ideas.
Right. That's true. I admittedly have lived some of my life, maybe much of my life, I don't know, in this paradigm of, well, I'm probably right. And I realize that can lead to a bit of recalcitrance, where if I go in thinking, well, I'm right, then I tend to have that bias of confirmation bias, of looking for the ways to confirm that I'm right, and then being unwilling to back down from that. And years ago, I changed this thought. I changed the text in my mind. And this is just for me, but I changed the text in my mind to say, I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. I don't know in what ways and to what extent, mm-hmm. which does not mean I'm not right. But I am already wrong in some way. Yeah. There's something I don't know yet. Right. And by just shifting that framework in my mind, going into new situations naturally presents with that idea of looking and listening and coming to conclusions rather than having a preconceived notion or a conclusion. And like I think Mike here's on the comments, he's saying, Blockbuster believed that their own press clippings as well. Blockbuster's not around anymore. Right. So people with that idea going in say, "Hey, I'm right," rather than practicing the principles or some of these micro skills. Mm-hmm. You end up with some epic failures sometimes.
Yeah. One of the micro skills is the micro skill of skepticism, and skepticism can help you from getting sucked in from the false claims of others. And it can help you, just as you're talking about, Jason, it can help you recognize where there might be limitations in your knowledge and belief. So that skepticism is one of those tough ones to really get your arms around. And quickly, though, I want to differentiate skepticism from cynicism. Skepticism is, I doubt your facts. And cynicism is, I doubt your motives. So cynicism is it's kind of poison that creeps into many cultures that just makes you believe that everybody's an idiot or everybody's in a conspiracy or something like that. Where skepticism is more scientific, if you will, which is a focus on facts and be willing to modify your beliefs based on facts. I'll tell you a real quick example of kind of how I handled the same thing. So I call it steamrolling, and that is a tendency to be self-righteous and just really want to invoke my thoughts onto the situation and just sort of disregard things that I don't quite agree with. Yeah. And one of the questions I ask myself is, am I steamrolling? Am I paying attention to weak signals? Am I paying attention to those things that I might not normally agree with? And am I trying to, if I'm in a conversation with another person, am I showing them honor and respect by trying to tease out of them some of the things that are making up their point of view?
Yeah. I love what you said about skepticism versus cynicism, because I think a lot of people are worried about being skeptics because they will be perceived as cynics. And I think if we came at our own situations and in a new way, and others in a new way, of allowing ourselves to to gather around the facts as though they're just information. And you and I were talking very briefly before our broadcast here about the ability to look outside or look at ourselves from the outside. So many times I think when people are stuck, and I feel like I've been stuck so many times in my life, when we're stuck, a lot of times we know where to go, we know what to do, we know what we would recommend. But when we're looking at it from the outside as ourselves and holding on to that so tightly, that situation so tightly, it's very difficult to see it. And all it takes is stepping out a little bit and saying, well, what would you tell Jason, knowing what you know now, knowing the facts, what would you advise Jason do? And it could be something as simple as I've got a friend who was talking about moving from one state to the other state, and made up a big reason why have to move the states because it's going to somehow influence elections and all sorts of stuff. And I said, what is it? I said, what if you just want to move? Why not? What is that even okay for you to just want to do something with no epic reason that's going to somehow affect the universe? And the answer is no, it's not, because somewhere that the text in the mind, the story in the mind was like, I can't just do that. I'm not one of those people who can just get up and do the thing that they want to do. And I said, well, if you were talking to that other person, knowing all the facts that you know, what would you tell them? And you say, oh, yeah, it's okay. You should go. It's time. You should go off and move. It's like, oh, okay. So why don't you? Right. And then all of a sudden there's another roadblock. Why don't we do the things that we know we can do or want to do? That's a totally different thing too. Yeah. So these micro skills, we're gonna as we're ending our broadcast, and I know I think I marked it for like 45 minutes or so. We want to respect people's time too. We're going to be doing a mastermind group on the book. We're going to go through the whole thing. And if for people who have not been part of a mastermind group before, it's a great, I think, method of interacting and learning together with peers through a topic. And so we're going to go through Greg's book, How to Think Strategically. We're going to break it up into 7 sessions. And so it'll actually be 14 weeks. Here's how it's going to work. You're going to have the first session, it's going to be teaching, and then we're going to follow it up with a week of an interaction session where we're going to get on a Zoom call. And we're going to talk about stuff and how we've applied. And there's going to be a lot of social interaction and peer interaction in a document as well. So we'll be able to share and learn and discover how people are applying these different skills as they go through these 14 weeks together. And then critically at the end of this, for those folks who are coaching other people or just want to do it for work, something like that, they'll get a certificate that you've gone through the How to Think Strategically mastermind group, and there are things you got to do. So it's not just you signed up for it and you went through it and we're going to stamp your ticket. We want to make sure that you actually have learned and you have engaged with the topics, so that that certificate means something. And I know that Greg's put a lot of time and effort into developing that book, so we don't want to see that go. We don't want to misuse his time and effort as we go through the teaching on How to Think Strategically mastermind group either. So that's roughly how it's going to work. You can get more information at the website, therealJtodd.com. I'm just going to pop a link down on the bottom here. But as we're closing up, Greg, talk to us a little bit. About what are some things that you might. And I know that we don't want to say that here's the 3 steps to being a strategic thinker. That's really not the truth, right?
Yeah. But
you mentioned the one thing and about looking in history, breaking your life up into parts and looking into history and evaluating those things. That's something that's pretty actionable.
Yeah.
And it works towards a skill that then can be applied towards strategic thinking. What's something else that somebody can keep in mind, perhaps for this following week? Yeah. And a skill that they can apply.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'd first like to say, just in amplifying your message about the upcoming class, is that you're going to get out of it what you put into it. And think about the benefits that I believe that you'll have. Is strategic thinking is rare and valuable. You'll be more valuable to your community, to your organizations, to your family, more promotable. But one of the reasons it's rare is that it's kind of hard to do. To the second part of your question, it's just, asking good questions. I'll tell you a real quick story. And the question that I asked and how it brought tremendous clarity to the client. So I was working with a client who had two really good job opportunities in front of him. One was in this part of the organization, the other was in the other part of the organization. And he engaged his network and his family, and he did the old, let's list the pros and the cons of each one. And he couldn't come up with a good answer. He was kind of stuck because they both had advantages and disadvantages. And the question I asked to him was, what do you think is the most probable outcome? And he said that when I asked that question, it was bang, here's the answer. Here is the position he's going to take. And he accepted that position, and it turned out that everything worked out really, really well for him. So that question of what do you think is the most probable outcome is just another expression of the micro skill of anticipation. So I think you're going to learn how to anticipate better, how to ask better questions, just to have a better sense of the things happening around you. Yeah,
I agree. I think this idea of strategic thinking, and maybe I'm a little biased because I admittedly live a lot in my mind. I think that as we learn to think through things better, we can treat ourselves better. We can chart better courses for ourselves. And instead of falling into traps that you look back and you're like, I can't believe I fell into that. Or if we're looking, many times it's really not us looking at ourselves. It's actually us looking at our neighbor going, hey, look at that dummy. I can't believe he's doing that. Isn't he thinking about that? It's like, maybe not, because people aren't all taught the same. But fortunately, we can be continual learners, and that's my goal. That's why I love engaging with topics like this and talking about your book and these micro skills of strategic thinking, because I think we owe it to ourselves. If we're gonna live, let's say we're gonna live a number of years together with ourselves and with each other, we should be investing in that. We should be investing in ourselves to become better people, and not just fritter away the time on Netflix or whatever else. Let's balance that, right? With becoming better people. So, any last words you want to leave us with? If there's any questions before we end our broadcast as well, just drop them in the chat. We'll get to your questions and your comments if you've got anything for us as well. But Greg, anything you want to leave us with?
I'm just reminded of the old German proverb saying, which is too soon old, too late smart. So maybe this is an opportunity to pick up some smarts before you get too old.
And there we go. Well, I tell you what, that's a good ending. And I know that people listen to this broadcast afterwards. So if you have questions or comments, drop them in the chat. That'd be great. Or in the comments. We'll get to those a little bit later. And again, we're going to have these every week leading up to the mastermind group, which does launch on October 1st. I'll just drop that image up there again. I don't want to make this all about sales, but I'm not afraid of sales either. It was termed to me at one point in time that sales is not a bad thing. If I knew that I had something that could change your life, I owe it to you to do my best to sell you that. Otherwise, I'm actually doing you a disservice. That's the other way to look at sales. So I am not apologetic. We've got some great information out here. And we're going to do our best to present it for you. And you can help us make it better by asking your questions in the chat and engaging in these discussions. And we're looking forward to seeing you. If you want information on the mastermind group, go ahead and put that in the chat as well. We can get back to you and follow up with that. But Greg, man, brother, it's always a good time to chat with you. I appreciate you. Appreciate all of our listeners here on LinkedIn and on YouTube. It's where I'm at. It's a cold fall afternoon, which I love because I finally get to put sweatpants and a sweatshirt, which is my happy place. So I wish all of you for a happy place on the remainder of this Thursday afternoon. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thanks, Jason. Thank you, everybody else. Thanks so much.